watch the show The Good Place?
Here and there, off and on.
So like the really dumb guy, the Asian
He's from
guy, he's from
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, and he just nails it.
Yeah, oh yeah,
He just nails it. He's like,
got it
Blake
down,
Bortles for
man.
the win.
That sounds right, right? Like Blake Bortles is a perfect example of Jacksonville.
Yeah.
You're like, I can't quite put my finger on why he's really bad, but everyone knows he's really bad.
Except for that one season where he was really good.
Hey man, Tim Tebow went to the playoffs too, and he like threw 2 passes in a game one time. Right? He won a playoff game.
He won a playoff game for
Right?
Denver.
That doesn't mean he was a good quarterback. Right? The rest of the team was so good they could play without a quarterback.
Well, to our listeners, welcome to Stuart Nincehelser, Part 2. Had a lot of technical difficulties in Part 1, so we're going to give this another go and give the podcast in a box another good run. So, Stuart, we appreciate your patience and your being willing to essentially do this all over again.
Oh yeah, but better.
But better.
Better.
Well, that's what we notice. Like every time we practice an episode, we practice a section that we want to talk about, we get better every time. So by this time, you should be able to nail your background about how you joined the Army.
I told you that I'm drinking this time though, right? So yeah.
Join the crowds.
It'll make for more interesting discussions, that's for sure.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I could definitely jump into how I ended up at 164. I mean, quick and dirty. I went to Florida State for college right out of high school. Didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Still don't. But got a degree in political science, and still didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I got a quick and dirty master's degree, and during that, I began working as an accountant. Which, as all of you are rolling your eyes right now, yes, it is as boring as you think, and I hated it. Realized that was not what I wanted to do with my life when I grew up. But the checks kept clearing. I kept showing up to work. And one day, one of my people I worked with got a phone call that her son had been killed in Iraq. He was an 18-year-old Marine, and he was killed in Fallujah. And obviously, she took it incredibly hard. And the office, kind of rallied around her and did everything we could. And I had the opportunity to, or the privilege, I should say, to attend his funeral in Tallahassee. It was pretty small. It was incredibly moving. The Marines put on a fantastic, memorial for him. And it was incredibly moving. And kind of in my head, something just clicked that, what is this kid who's 18 years old, and his team leader, I believe, was 21 years old. They're out there fighting and dying in Fallujah, in Iraq, and Afghanistan, and here I am. I was 25. I was in pretty good shape. I thought I was a decently smart dude. I felt kind of guilty for not doing something. And, kind of it hit me at the right time when I was, not sure what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I didn't want to be an accountant. So I went down and I talked to the recruiter, told him I wanted to, join the Army, join the infantry, and do something where I can, maybe prevent something like that happening to somebody else. Of course, I was quite naive and full of myself that I would be able to stop somebody from possibly dying. But that was me at 25, I guess. And so within, I think, 2.5 weeks from walking to the recruiter's office, I was hopping off a bus at Fort Benning. I went through basic training, followed on, went to airborne school, which was a hoot. Loved every second of it. And then I was given the option to go to either the 82nd at Fort Bragg or the airborne unit in Alaska. And without hesitation, I went to Alaska. And one of the best decisions of my life.
Yeah, good call.
Especially after meeting
Agreed.
people from the 82nd and all the nonsense they do. I made the right decision. So yeah, and I went to Alaska. It's for anybody wondering, it's the greatest place on earth. And
Sure is.
yeah, as Curtis can attest to, it's fantastic. And so I joined the unit up there. It's 140 Cav. I was infantry in a cavalry unit, which was both a blessing and a curse. Blessing in that it was a small reconnaissance dismounted unit, which was fantastic. You really worked with some of the best of the best. A lot of dudes that came from Ranger Battalion, and they came up to Alaska to enjoy Fort Hunt and Fish, as Fort Richardson is affectionately known. And so you got some really top quality leadership and some of the best leaders I've ever met and had the privilege to work with in the military I met there. We did 1 year-long deployment to Paktia province of Afghanistan, which is up in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan at a little place called Cop Wilderness. And I did a year there and then came back to Alaska and had about 2 years left on my contract. And the Army said, if you want to stay in Alaska, you have to re-enlist. And I knew the Army was probably not for me. So I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So I had to PCS somewhere. And in my infinite wisdom, I decided that Fort Stewart was going to be perfect because it was not only close to home, because my home is in Tallahassee, Florida. Savannah's, 3.5, 4 hours away, that I could be close to home. And I had just come back from Afghanistan where there are hardly any roads and they don't allow tanks. And I knew that 3rd ID had tanks that they were married to. And I knew there was no way they would send a heavy unit to Afghanistan. So I could just ride out the last year and a half or so of my contract close to home and riding around in a tank, because the stereotype is, right, like everybody rides around in tanks.
Baby
It's the
tankers.
best. Yeah, it's the best
baby
job ever. You
tankers,
just ride
man.
around in a tank.
Mhm.
I rode around in a tank once my entire time at Fort Stewart. I'm bitter about that, and it was a miserable experience. But yeah, so that's how I ended up at 164 with 3rd ID, and it, I'm sure we can get into the fun antics that happened once we got there. But yeah, that's the quick and dirty story about how I ended up at 164.
Not to backtrack too much, but
Yeah.
why did you choose to go enlisted instead of an officer? Because you had a degree at that point.
Yeah, I I had friends that were officers, and some of them were a little disillusioned in that they didn't really get to do what they wanted. They really like to be at the line unit, being a lieutenant, where they're actually doing movements and doing a lot of things. And they kind of went, once you're in the officer track, your career is almost laid out for you, right? And you don't have a lot of, well, you have choice, right? Obviously, you have some choice. But the way career progression works is you have to do all these different things, and you're not going to like a lot of them. And, like I said, I kind of joined up with the intent that I was going to, try and, maybe do the right thing by some people and maybe, prevent some people from dying or from being hurt. And I thought that enlisted was probably going to be the best way to do that for me. And honestly, I knew, I guess going in, I knew I didn't want to make it a full-time career. Like I knew I wasn't going to do 25 years and get out, right? Like,
Sure.
but I knew I didn't like where I was, and I just kind of needed to change things up. And yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time. If I could do it differently, maybe I'd do it differently next time.
Warrant
But
officer.
yeah, I don't I don't regret it either. Like some of the experiences
Sure.
I had and some of the people I've met, are second to none, and I don't regret it in the slightest.
So you actually have the distinction of you're probably going to end up being one of the only people we talked to that did not earn your CIV in Sperwangar
Yeah.
in 2012. And you had a previous deployment to, like you mentioned, to Paktia.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a rare opportunity for us to kind of compare and contrast what we went through versus another very difficult fight,
Sure.
very different fight, but a very difficult fight. So if you could just kind of lay out what it was like in Paktia and kind of how it differed or how it was similar to what you experienced in Sperwangar, and I'd also love to hear how you earned your CIB.
Oh, that's not a very good story, but Um, but I could definitely tell you, yeah. No, yeah, it is a very different fight. And it was one that I was unprepared for Panjwai because of what I had come from previously. My previous experience in Afghanistan was, I think our cop was in the neighborhood of about 7,000 feet up. We
Wow.
were up in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan in an area called the KG Pass, which is a very narrow pass that runs between Khost and Gardez, which are the two capitals of two different provinces, like the only bigger cities in that area. Uh, Gardez in Paktia province and Khost, or yeah, Khost and Khost, right? I think, yeah. Um, but we were a tiny little cop that was nestled on the road in this valley. Um, the roads that we would use were, you know, in the middle of a valley where mountains were on either side, and these were imposing steep mountains. And oftentimes, the fight with the enemy was more intense because it was often more orchestrated, and that they would attack you from elevation, and they would attack your vehicles. They would always attack us while we were in the vehicles or when we had exited the vehicles, to conduct a shura or something like that. But they were very wise in that they would choose positions because they knew our guns could only elevate so far, and we had to make adjustments and things like that by putting pintle mounted saws that we could elevate straight up. Um, but you were fighting a somewhat professional enemy, or one that knew your tactics well enough that they could engage them. Um, but we were often fighting Haqqani network fighters that were fairly well equipped and had reasonably good training as well. So it
Yeah,
was
'cause
very
it's a
different.
mercenary force.
Effectively, it was a mercenary
Yeah.
force, and we would, whenever we would find, uh, you know, dead fighters that we had killed or whatever, oftentimes they would have pocketfuls of money and new
Hmm.
shoes. Oddly enough,
Hmm.
it was a weird, thing to find a fighter who is dressed in rags, wearing like shiny new knockoff Nikes, right? It was a
Yeah.
weird thing, right? And it was because that's what they would do, is they would buy nice shoes because they knew they were going to be walking through the mountains. Um,
Yeah.
but it was a very weird thing. Um, but that, contrast that to the fighters in Panjwai that were much more local. Um, that if they weren't from the immediate village from where they're fighting you, it's from the general vicinity of the region. So it was very different, and it was a very different fight in that we actively practiced a lot of counterinsurgency, where we could engage with the populations, and they would tell us, "Look, this is the problem. We'd like to help you, but the second you leave, they're going to come in here, beat us up, and unless you can provide security, there's nothing we can do to you, or do for you." And so they were really caught between a rock and a hard place. Us on one hand, who they want to help, and then the fighters on the other hand, who if they help us, then the fighters are going to murder them, kidnap their people. I mean, it was a really tough spot. So it was a very different fight, but we definitely practiced coin pretty effectively, as effectively as it can be, right? We tried very hard, um, but it was very different. The fights were not as frequent. We would go weeks without a contact, but then you'd have a flurry of them because that's when the fighters were in the area, right? They would come to fight. And there was a very distinct fighting season where, once the passes got snowy and impassable, it was over. Like, not only could we not move, they couldn't move either, because the roads were such that we could not move around without our vehicles falling off a cliff, right? Because it was, and the closest I think I've ever come to death was driving a vehicle on one of those mountain passes where the wheels were sliding off the road and we could feel it. And you're talking about a 500-foot drop, right? Like it's not one you're going to survive in a up armored Humvee,
No, I remember because in 2017 I flew the KG Pass often. I was at Coast for a couple months, and I remember looking down on it and being like, I really hope we didn't put infantry guys down there, because it's just, like you said, it's sheer cliffs. It's a river at the bottom. There's a road that runs along it. There's no cover, and it's literally the most important economic thoroughfare.
Yeah.
Other than what can't remember what the name of the gates are over by Jbad.
Yeah.
But in East Afghanistan, that is the route in from Pakistan, and it's super, super busy and very important.
Very busy. Yeah, absolutely. It is a thoroughfare, and that's why we were there, right? Was theoretically to guard that road because it was constant traffic. And if, insurgents, for lack of a better term, they would put up impromptu checkpoints, and if they did, it would choke commerce in that whole area. And that's why we were there, is to ensure that didn't happen. So at least that's what I understand our mission was there. But as far as my CIB, it's not a fun story. It was, we had done a mounted mission, and we had all kind of gotten out of the truck for the night or something like that, because we were just like camping out or something. I can't remember, army camp out, right? And I think somebody just shot at the trucks or something like that, and of course everyone death blossomed, from there, like standard, response.
Yeah.
And then that was fairly early on in the deployment, and so the leadership was good about like, look, we don't know if that's the only contact we're gonna get. So of course everybody got their CIB for it. But unfortunately the contact was pretty steady after that, through about August or September. But yeah, that was the story of the CIB. It was not as cool as a lot of other guys, but that's why I was like, oh, the story of my CIB is not really memorable,
but still, y'all saw plenty of combat during that deployment, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Pretty
man,
hefty stuff.
Yeah, there were some really good not good engagements, right? There were some hearty contacts. And there's some really cool YouTube videos out there if people want to do a Google search for I think it's called like Cop Devo or something like that. We had a PAO that put together a really good video about that, and it's fun to watch. There's some really cool Apache gun film that's made its way in there. Yeah, I will take this moment to thank Apaches for that one. They did some really good work on our deployment. I think because Apaches were like the only gun platform that could get up that high, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Kiowas can't fly up that high, and there's a lot of issues with using like the AC-130s that close to the border because of the big circles that they have to pull.
But they still possibly maybe use them quite a bit. Possibly,
yeah.
Allegedly.
Well, I don't know if you've looked at the official maps of that area where it has the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. It says approximate border.
Yeah, no.
So it's not like it's a hard line.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I flew into Pakistan.
Oh, I've never walked into Pakistan on accident either.
So that being said, so when you came to us in 164, you were in the unique position in that you had actually had experience, not just some actual combat experience, because our previous deployment was not it was a combat deployment, but we never saw combat.
Right.
As a company, except for like a couple IED strikes. So, we were more or less fresh, and so you came to us with this unique position of not only being a combat veteran, but also having been to Afghanistan, which Bravo 164 had never deployed to before, and nobody in 3rd ID had deployed to before, except for our sister battalion, which was just a few months ahead of us, except for the aviation unit in 3rd ID. So when you first got to 164 with this background, and then you heard that we were actually going, what was going through your head? Like, what was the first thing that you were thinking about?
Well, it's funny because just like there is always in military units, like rumors were flying, right? Like
Hmm.
everyone had heard that, oh, we're going to Afghanistan, or we're going here, we're going there. And I just remember hearing the Afghanistan rumors and being like, just looking around going, we're not going to Afghanistan. Like, there's no way this unit, like, dude, half the unit is running around shooting tanks and Bradleys right now, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. There's no way this unit doesn't have the personnel to do that. How naive I was. Um, but, uh, but yeah, so as the rumors started to heighten up, and some people that were not rumor mongers were saying, "Look, I'm hearing from a friend that like this is happening. Like we're gonna go." I started to get a little nervous, right? Because literally Bradleys were still out doing gunnery.
And we were halfway
Um,
through the last couple tables of gunnery when we got the word that we
absolutely.
were going.
And I was you know, running a squad of dismounted infantry right there. Half those guys were cast-offs from mounted, right? Because a lot of the leadership tried to take and don't let this go to your head, coffee. They tried to take a lot of the choice soldiers
I, I
onto
should
mounted.
also I should also say that I was a Sergeant First Class Ots Bradley gunner, which is to say that I basically
God
ran
damn
the
it.
Bradley myself
But
because he
but
he entrusted me with it.
as he should. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Good job,
no knock to
Coffee.
Sergeant Ott, who is fantastic. But no, it was very like to to clear gunnery, right? You needed to have really competent individuals that are running the Bradley. Like it's just the reality. And sometimes, um, decisions were made to put some of the best people on the tracks because they needed to. Didn't you guys win a trophy or something stupid? Like if you
Dude,
shot the
you get
most
like a
fake
fucking
targets?
RCOM, and you
Top
get like
Gun,
if you
man.
Top
stop
Gun,
if
that's
you
what
got
it was.
distinguished Top Gun, yes, I think that was what it was. Nah,
Yeah, exactly. So all of the, leadership would try and get the best people they could so they could get that stupid Top Gun that meant nothing. Sorry for tankers, but right? But so a lot of the dismounts were guys that, for one reason or another, people didn't want them on tracks. And I remember my, you know, 3 or 4 months before we started getting those deployment, I spent all my time chaptering dudes out. Like I was walking guys to JAG, we were going to hearings, taking them to mental health. I mean, there was just not much training going on because, it was just a kind of a mess. And, so that's how I never really thought that we would deploy. And then as it started ramping up and they're like, we're going to pull you off doing some of the chapter work so that we can like start having you teach guys how to operate machine guns and stuff like that. Um, then it started to become a little real. Um,
mm,
and I remember once we found out, right, we, we're going to Afghanistan. We got orders. I mean, I remember just a sinking feeling in my stomach, like, man, we're in trouble. Like we are in
mm,
real trouble. Um, and that's not because I didn't think that the individuals were capable of doing well. It's that no one had trained
yeah,
for any kind of ground fighting. Like we didn't have weapons that were um, ready to go. Like we had one Mark 19, I think, in the arms room, and it was like missing parts, right? And they're like, "Hey, let's go like do a class on the Mark 19." And I'm like, "I can't. It's missing a feed tray." Right? Like you
yeah.
can't take it apart when you don't have the pieces.
This is actually something an aside to make. When you're in a mechanized unit, all the money, all the money gets sunk into tanks and Bradleys. And so if you're in the infantry in one of these mechanized units, then you're not getting the latest best gear. So like
No.
we had saws that were from, like fucking OIF 2 and 3, that were still being used as weapons when we deployed in Afghanistan. So it was never a priority to have the latest and greatest.
Yeah, and that's again kind of why I never really fathomed that we would go, is because the unit was so geared to mechanized warfare
Yeah.
and not for light infantry stuff.
Hmm.
And again, that's not a knock on the soldiers. It's that the unit was not designed for it. the training was not there for it. The equipment was not there for it. And I didn't think, and again, my naivete, that they would be like, oh, this is the perfect unit to go fight dismounted in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Right. But it all, obviously it became very real very quickly. And the priorities changed. And to the leadership's credit, they dropped all things mechanized and kind of gave some of the NCOs some guidance that, okay, it's time to start working on dismounted stuff. Like we're going to go do some, gunnery or dismounted gunnery. We're going to get some range time, get guys familiar with weapon systems. We're going to do house clearing. We're going to do all this kind of stuff. Granted, that's maybe something that could have been done months ahead of time, but things are what they are, and we did with the best we could.
Yeah, we found out in November, and we deployed in March. So
Yeah.
it's like a 5-month turnaround versus
And
normally you would have a year.
with holiday block leave in there.
Yeah, with block
Yeah.
leave in there. So you
Yeah.
lose about a month and a half. Realistically, you lose about a month and a half of training
Yeah.
up there.
Well, then you
Yeah.
always go to like 4-day weekends the last month before you deploy.
Mm.
There's
Absolutely.
NTC in there, so like
Yeah, the amount of actual training time was not much at all.
I remember like 2 or 3, like 2 fill problems. There's that one we did the freaking like, man, Kitching smoked the shit out of us, and he marched us back
Yeah.
to the company over. It was what 25, 30 miles.
It's a lot of hurting feet at the end of that day.
Yeah, of just
Yeah.
sucking. But
Absolutely.
well, back on that, it's like that of all the pre-train up crap we did, walking that long ass day where we walked
Yep.
for miles and miles and miles and miles, carrying everybody else's shit when they fell out. For those
Yep.
of you who did, when they fell out, we had to carry your shit. But that was more beneficial than anything else we could have done because that's basically what we did in Afghanistan.
yeah, old Brian knew what he was doing setting that thing up. Because how many times did we have to carry somebody's shit back after they got blown up or they got shot or they got medevaced or they had a heat cat in the middle of a freaking field? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's one of those things that's impossible to teach like on a day field problem, right? Like you have to just have your body accustomed to carrying stuff. Like
Yeah.
just carrying weight, get your feet ready for it, get your back ready for it, get your
Yeah.
hips ready for it.
well, that's where I think like me and the other people that came straight out of basic kind of had a little bit of a leg up.
You did for
Because
sure.
we came right out
Yes,
of
you did.
normal infantry OSIS, so we had just done all of it. Not that it was particularly hard, but we all had passed PT tests recently. We had done a 12-mile ruck.
You had
and
done,
we had-
you had done a 12-mile ruck, dude. Like
Yeah.
the last 12 miles, I only did one 12-mile ruck in 3rd ID between graduating basic training and then deploying to Afghanistan.
I had to
you
do
know.
a 12-mile ruck as a pilot
That's
For
because you
time
weren't a
or
baby
just-
tanker, son.
for
kit.
time.
Okay.
For time,
All right.
and I still did it to the infantry standard,
Nice.
even when I was fat.
Yeah. Well, 3rd ID is, it's riddled with. That's a tangent. We can't even go.
Yeah, I was
down.
going to say, we can cut that part out. No.
Yeah.
3rd ID is many things. We can leave it at that.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, for sure.
We'll save a special episode. We'll bring Nitz back for our 3rd ID is fucked up episode.
Yeah.
Look, there are some good things about 3rd ID, and I will be the first to admit that. But there are also many things that leave
Much to be
some
desired.
things to be desired.
Yeah.
Correct. And if I hear the Dogface Soldier song one more time, I swear to God,
I'll refrain from singing it for you.
that's
I couldn't
not the
even-
opening
I
of this
couldn't even
podcast,
sing
right?
it.
No.
No.
Because if it is, I cancel all.
That'd be
this
fair.
interview's over.
So we talked about 3rd ID and how basically your response to us getting orders to Afghanistan was complete disbelief and utter fear and despair. But having been to Afghanistan before,
Dread, I think, was the keyword.
having been to Afghanistan before, I mean, what did you know about Kandahar? Because obviously, I'm sure you knew that Kandahar was a little bit different, but did you know? What did you know?
So part of me was a little thankful because I knew Kandahar was flat, right? And one of the hardest parts of the previous deployment was like, we got to go up that mountain. And you had to walk up that mountain with all your gear, at 8,000 feet, just sucking. Like there were a couple times I was in really good shape, and I remember there were a couple times where I just was like, I don't know that I can put another foot in front of the other, right? And you find a way to do it, right? Like it's how it happens. But like it is brutal. And when you got to go from ridge to ridge, it is devastating. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, it's going to be flat. How bad can it be? Right? Like, no big deal. Because at that point, I didn't know enough. I was like, well, there's not really IEDs, not dismounted IEDs in Afghanistan. So it'll be fine. Right? I thought that was an Iraq thing. How wrong I was. Right? Um, but so I didn't know a ton. And I remember when we were at NTC and Captain Kitching kind of gave us a little breakdown about where we were going. That, the fight was really heavy. There was a lot of direct contact, as well as IEDs. And, some stupid amount of Air Force ordnance had been dropped in the area. And, the amount of resources that were dedicated to that area was just incredible. And it kind of dawned on me. I was like, I don't know a lot. I had assumed that most of the fighting in the South was focused in Helmand, which there was obviously a ton of fighting in Helmand, and it was a very difficult fight there. But I didn't know as much about Kandahar and Panjwai in particular. I knew nothing about it. I read up a little bit. I know that we were given a little bit of material, maybe check this out, check that out.
Right.
And I did. But I honestly knew not much at all. And I was largely unprepared for what we were going to walk into. I had a couple inherent advantages that helped, and that I had grown up in North Florida with a lot of heat and humidity, which came in very handy for the summers in Panjwai, that's for sure.
So one of the things that we've talked about a lot is how, everybody has that first impression when they land. And for me, my two first impressions were, okay, like it's flat. I was really surprised by that because I just thought it was going to be mountainous. Then the other impression was how nice Sperwingar was compared to what I was expecting in my mind. But for you coming from the mountains, like when, and also that flatness was deceiving. We've talked about it a lot because you just climb up and down all the time, because you're hopping Great Walls, hopping Colossus, things like that. What was your first impressions of Panjwai at large, compared to your previous experience, especially, but whenever we choppered in there?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very similar impression that you had. When I landed at Sperwingar, I went, oh, this is nice. All right, we have a hard building that's pretty extensive. There's a pretty solid chow hall.
Yep.
Which is always the first thing you should check out when you go to a new cop. And it looked very secure, right? Like high walls, guard towers around. It looked like a very secure facility. And the previous cop I came from, that is not the impression you got, because it was literally dropped in some mountains. And the walls were just sea wire that were rolled all around, right? And there were roving patrols, and you had private Afghan security, which allegiances are shifting at all times with private security in Afghanistan. So I think on a daily basis, I was going to feel much more secure, right? Now, when we started to make our first forays out into the villages and some of the areas surrounding, I was somewhat hopeful, right? Because the first month or so, we didn't take any contact, and I went, okay, everyone's generally friendly. Our dismounted patrols are going to go maybe a mile at most, and then we come around and come back. It's not like, drive for 3 hours, walk for 2 more hours, walk back 2 hours, and then drive back, which was oftentimes some of our missions in the mountains, because you had to drive a good ways just to get to where you wanted to go. So I was heartened to a certain extent in that regard. But you, you also kind of dawned on you that, man, any dude with a rifle that wanted to do harm, the options are endless here, right? Like with the gray putts and the walls everywhere and compounds and the footpaths that were everywhere. So there's exfil possibilities everywhere. It kind of dawned on me that, wow, if you wanted to cause some havoc, it is not hard here. Especially with the way that we move, right? With the way formations are required to set up, get in a line, right, and head in a certain direction. I mean, it's an ambusher's dream. And that kind of dawned on me after we started walking around a little bit. So
It doesn't help that we, during the rip and for the first couple of weeks, we walked on the roads.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
we were like, yeah, this is easy because you just walk from village to village and nobody's messing with us, and we haven't run into these IEDs that they say are everywhere. It was just quick moving.
I remember thinking the same thing because that's what the unit that was there before us told us, is that IEDs are everywhere. You got to be on the lookout for them. And it's like, okay, but then we would walk on the roads and we never saw anything. We weren't taking contact. I kind of went, were they kind of just exaggerating to make themselves sound cooler than they were?
Yeah.
They were not. They were not. But the thought crossed my mind, right? I'd be lying if I said it didn't.
But when did it really sink in? Like, we got a few skiffs here and there. We started to get some contact, and one of the things I think is kind of interesting about our deployment is that between April, when we first took contact, and all the way through till throat chop, which is kind of this apex of the deployment, and then we obviously got into some contact after throat chop, but it just ramped up. It never slowed back down. Between April and October, it just is a steady ramping up of the amount of contact we took, the casualties we took, the IED strikes. So like, when did it really kind of stick to you? Like, oh shit, this is it.
That's a hard one for me. It's hard for me to pin like a single moment on it. And I think your squad actually in first platoon, you guys took a really solid contact. And that's when I kind of went, well, our time's coming, right? Like, our squad is going to get that sustained contact. And I think we did a battalion mission over by Zangabad where we were doing some blocking positions and things like that. And I think that's the first time I realized that it's going to be pretty constant, because our squad took a few really solid contacts on that mission. I think it was just a timing thing, the reasons we got it. And part of that was because, if I remember correctly, Nagurn in our squad, every time he went to pee over the course of like 3 days, they tried to shoot his penis off, which was a really interesting coincidence. Maybe they just really wanted his penis. I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, that was one where it's real. Like, these guys are not scared to engage, right? Because we were there. There were a lot of elements moving around. There was air cover constantly, and these dudes were still taking shots at us.
Yeah.
Pretty consistently. And that's when I went, wait a second. This is not somebody just shooting and then taking off just to say they did it, right? These guys are really sticking around and just, they don't care. So I think that's kind of when it dawned on me that this is a little different. And that we're kind of in for a fight to a certain extent. So.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess that's when it dawned on me. But to be fair, May through October is just a blur almost.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's sad to say that, but kind of the mentality I had was, get through this one, wake up, and let's do it again tomorrow, and do it again tomorrow, because I'm out of the Army in 9 months and 14 days.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And
I
I'm
was
going
in
to
the
do
same
whatever
boat.
I got to do to make sure I prevent the guys trying to stop me from getting out of the Army. So
Yeah, I was in the same boat, man. Like especially that period of time, like you said, May to October. Like it was a weird. It's like a blur. And there's times where I'll be talking to people and they'll mention, like a particular firefight or something that I've completely forgotten about.
Oh, all the
'Cause
time.
I was
Absolutely.
just so obsessed with the end goal of getting out, and like I was applying to school and getting ready for my life after the army,
Yeah.
and so there's a whole little swaths of my memory that are, full of holes. So here I am doing a podcast about it.
Absolutely, all the time. So it's crazy. So when I came up there and we did our test run of this podcast, um, you and I were having some discussions about certain, and I had completely forgotten them.
Yeah,
It just completely lost. And you were explaining, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that.
yeah,
And that
and
was like a significant mission that like a
yeah.
lot of crazy stuff happened. And I just,
Well, there's a lot of stuff, and one of the things that in those first few months, and I think this is might be one of the reasons why our memories are also so disjointed, is that our squads would go out on different patrols.
Yeah.
So second squad would go out on something, and then we would go out on something, and
Yeah.
so we would not get into the same firefights, the same little ticks or whatever. But
Yeah.
over the course of those few months, leading up to October, we more or less had different experiences. So there were some days that were really thick for you guys too. Like you
Oh,
had
yeah. I mean, we
what came
had
to be
some good
known as
ones.
Vietnam Day, and
Oh yeah,
there's
man. The
the
bamboo.
day over in the
Yeah,
Jot, and
absolutely.
Well,
No,
that,
there were some good ones.
I mean, that's kind of what stands out is if we ended up giving a day or a mission a name, we remembered it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Throat Shot Minotaur Down, Vietnam Day, Low Crawl Day, or if it was a day that somebody got hurt, we remember it. But there was a lot of significant things that happened that still, don't cross my mind because it never earned its own nickname.
yeah,
Or the day
Oh,
that
absolutely.
Straka followed a random Afghan kid the wrong way down a road and for quarter of a mile before he realized that maybe he shouldn't follow the Afghans.
I was so mad at him that day. That's also the day we should have took contact.
Yeah, because we
But
were
we
we were in
didn't.
Najat.
Yeah,
We
and that
didn't know
was
it. We didn't know we were in the worst place of the AO. We were walking on the roads.
yeah, it was
This is a
really
cool
early
little
in the
school here.
deployment.
Walking
Yeah,
down
and
Summerside.
that's the crazy thing to me sometimes is like things you didn't even know were putting you in massive danger. You just didn't know, especially early on in the deployment. You just did not know
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
how wrong you were.
yeah.
And chance sometimes shines on the oblivious, I guess.
Well, that exact mission that Curtis is talking about, I remember pushing in, taking the roads, and there just been as a ghost town, man. It was really close actually to where we ended up doing throat chop, I think. And I remember at one point in the mission, this was the day that the SF guys actually lost their dog, and their dog ended up getting strung up by the Taliban. It got caught and killed by the Taliban and hung it from a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember pushing in there, and this motorcycle was the only people we saw the whole day. This motorcycle came back and kind of drove through our patrol a little bit and shot on down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But right before they turned right and kind of got about, because I don't think we surprised them. I don't think that they knew we were right there. But there was two dudes on it. The guy in the front was a younger guy, but the guy in the back, man, like riding shotgun, was just evil looking. Like he had the black turban and the black beard, and he had the eyeliner and everything. And looking back on it now, I realize like that dude was probably a Taliban commander. He's probably one of the head honchos. And this dude looked at me with just like death stare. It's like I've never looked at hate until I looked into that guy's eyes. Like that dude wanted me to die. And at the time, I was just like, "Oh, that guy looks kind of mean,"
It's funny you mentioned that we probably surprised them, and the thought came to my mind too that with those early missions when we went to places like Najat, just look at us here, they were probably like, oh, the Americans aren't on that road. There's no way they're that stupid. Like, nope,
Yeah.
there they are, and they're like, well, shit, I guess we better start fighting season.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Is like I remember the first couple times I went to Sketcha, I was like, man, Sketcha is the bomb. I love this town.
Yeah.
Right. And we walked around freely, and there's people running around all the time. And man, it was like a switch got flicked,
Yeah.
and that place became a death trap.
Yeah.
and there were IEDs everywhere.
Overnight,
Right.
it was crazy.
Overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, but I remember the first couple times we went in there, man, it was like Christmas.
Mhm.
Like people running around, happy, running around, offering us food and stuff. I'm like, this is great. Sketcha's the best.
They had like a spring in the middle of town.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
it's great.
Well, now that I think
And,
about it, like when we left to clear the horn, when we came back from that, that's when it shifted. So it's almost like because we were gone for a week and a half, that's when like, okay, now is our time to put all these IEDs in. Because the next thing we did is we cleared Sketcha after we cleared the horn. It was like maybe a week later.
And that was engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So that I felt like the engineers really changed the eastern half of the AO, and that was in June.
June 12th, 10th,
So
yeah,
we-
12th.
So we'd been there 2-3 months. At that point, most of the a good chunk of our contact was out west, and we got into some contact to the east. But I felt like the engineers and that whole mission, because there were so many like BIPs and stuff like that we did, and controlled debts that we did. That was just, it was a slog, and that was the first time we awakened to what was going on out there, and then the rest of the deployment was out east.
Yeah. Absolutely. That mission was really a turning point. I know for my squad, right? It was very pivotal, especially in my mind, for sure. It was one of the ones that stands out the most and made the most impression, and kind of, I would say, affect the psyche of my squad the most. Actually, it was very, very tough. So yeah, that one was very difficult.
Well, I mean, and that one started. There was no easing into that clearing operation. We started at the north at Hyena, and the two squads were running parallel. Moving to the south, I think we were a little bit further to the west. You guys were a little bit further to the east, but we were maybe never more than 100 meters apart in actual distance. Like we probably could have thrown a rock at each other over a clot and hit each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were I believe, the far eastern element of that whole operation.
Right.
And yeah, we were moving parallel north to south, and it was supposed to be a couple days long, maybe 3 days long, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was
three,
original
yeah.
plan.
Yeah, original was and just clear north to south from Route Hyena all the way to the the Reggae's
Mhm.
down south. And the goal was to, if I remember correctly, to clear the routes for Afghan security forces to have freedom of movement.
Mhm.
And I think that was the plan, is to make sure the paths and the roadways were clear so they could move freely.
Yeah, because we were on the roads the whole time. That
Yeah,
whole
and
mission.
that was the point,
Yeah.
right? The point of that mission was to clear the roads and the pathways. And yeah, I can go into that one if you'd like. We can.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important, especially
Yeah.
early on. And like you
Yeah.
said, probably kind of the most impactful for your squad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can start from the beginning and just, we laid a little bit of the groundwork of that mission was to clear north to south, and it was I believe, a battalion-wide effort, all the way across, and it was an interesting mission, and that we had a significant number of attachments, and we had two individuals join us for that mission from the 18th Engineering Company for the 137th Field Artillery. We had two combat engineers, Joseph Lilly and Trevor Penning, and they joined us the morning of the mission. And fun story, Joseph Lilly had fought to come back for that particular mission. He had been shot in the neck, I believe, a couple weeks beforehand, and had been in the hospital getting stitches and getting stitched back up. And he showed up to us with a bloody bandage on his neck from when he had gotten shot. And I remember talking with him that morning, and I was like, man, why do you got a bandage on your neck? Thinking he had like cut himself saving or something, right? Oh, I got shot in the neck a couple weeks ago. Excuse me? But he fought to come back for that mission because he didn't want his guys to be out there by themselves. And, we had a lot of time at the beginning of that mission to talk with those two guys, and they were absolutely fantastic. Um, and, excited to get out there and do their job and really kind of get in the mud, getting out in the weeds, which I found really ironic from a guy who had just gotten shot in the neck a couple weeks ago. But, um, he a different breed. But yeah, we started on the mission, and before too long, we were finding IEDs, left and right, right. And their credit, they were blowing them in place routinely, identifying them, blowing them in place, and moving on. Getting the material that they needed so they could identify things later on, and then moving on. And I think we had blown 6 or 7 as the day was going on, and staying online with everybody else and communicating and whatnot.
Because we had one too. We had their, I think it was their squad leader was with us.
Correct.
So it was like, we would hear you guys blow, and then we would blow. It was just like back and forth down these parallel roads. It was just nonstop, and it was all
nuts.
carbon rod IEDs. It was the first time they had shown up, and thank God we had the combat engineers, and they had mine hounds, and they knew how to use them, and they were up front, and it wasn't us up front. It would have been. Can you imagine?
Mass cow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would have been a meat grinder if we didn't have guys that knew the equipment as so well. And, we were finding a lot of them. And, it's a credit to their expertise that they were able to find them and catch them. And there were a couple of them they pointed out to me where I would not have even guessed that there was something there. And then they would show me the signs that were not the ones that we would typically see to identify where they were. And I'd be like, oh, wow. And they're like, yeah, we used to see this other places. And it's kind of troubling that we see it here. And they'd pull pieces of the ID and be like, oh, yeah, we know this guy. Like, this guy is, known in the area. And you're like,
Wow.
yeah, okay, yeah. Bob down the street, right?
Yeah, you got an address for him or what?
Yeah, I know. Right? Like, if we know this dude, like, maybe we should, like, take him out.
Yeah.
If it were that easy, right? But yeah, as the day went on, we were finding them, destroying them, and moving on. At one point, the Afghan army attachments that were with us kind of went off the path a little bit and ended up hitting an ID themselves. They had one of their individuals step on it, and he got roughed up really bad. And that was kind of a bad omen, right, for that mission as it was going to go down, because we were moving pretty confidently through that area, and when he got hit, it was very sobering. It was tough for me because I thought one of our guys got hit, because we had kind of stopped for a little bit, and the Afghans wanted to find some shade, so they went off to the side, and unfortunately, that's where the IED was, and they hit it. And we dealt with the casualty as best we could. I believe he did not make it. I can't imagine he did, as we took a look at his injuries and tried to help him out as best we could. But we got him out of there and then continued the mission. And then as the afternoon wore on, a little bit later on in the day, we found a really odd intersection that somebody identified what looked like an IED in a tree. And there's something odd about that, right? Like, and everyone knew it. And the engineers were like, look, we know there's something there. This is usually a sign of a secondary IED. They're trying to set you up to hit something else. So they said, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna take care of it. So we all stopped, set up security, and they very deliberately cleared the whole area around it, cleared any approaches to it, and then ascertained, we can't find anything here. There's nothing here. Maybe it is just set up to hit people as they're walking across the bridge. So they made preparations to blow that in place as best they could from up in the tree. And unfortunately, in the act of, setting up that charge to blow that one up, they encountered a second IED that was really substantial, and it was a massive explosion. And it was a really big one, uh, to the point where I could not see anything for a good minute. And when I finally did get up close to where it was, we had several guys on the ground because they had been close enough to the blast that they had been knocked over and were disoriented enough that they could not, kind of get back up because they didn't know what was going on. Um, and then as we were able to get a little bit closer and see what was going on, we had realized that the IED had hit both Pinnock and Lily, and they were both in pretty rough shape. Um, you know, I personally was able to get up to Pinnock first. I believe, off the top of my head, I can't remember who else was there, but there was one other person there with me, and we were trying to very quickly provide his best care that we could. However, Pinnock was in very bad shape, and it was very obvious that this was going to be a significant challenge, to get him back. Um, and then I remember that, Doc, who was also roughed up to a certain extent from that one because he had been reasonably close to the blast. He, made a very quick assessment and then went to try and find Lily, because we knew that he was injured and we had to check on him. And Lily was where the bulk of the care went to, because it was identified that he had the best chance of being able to get out of there, with a reasonable chance of success for him making it.
And I want to interject here because I don't want it to sound
Yeah,
like
of course.
It's not that Pinnock wasn't cared for.
No, absolutely
And
not. Absolutely not.
and without going into the graphic detail on his wounds,
Sure.
it's just important to note that there's only certain treatments that can be done for certain kind of injuries. You reach a point where you can only do so much, and they need to get to that higher care, which is where those medevac crews come in. You have to get them to a higher care. Combat medics, as much miracle workers as they are, and the great training that we received, which we've talked about in earlier episodes, only goes so far when you're talking about, double, triple amputees, very high amputations. And I know you weren't saying that he wasn't taken care of, but I really just wanted to clarify for those listening and those who may have known Pinnock or who knew Lily that, the men of Bravo 164 never gave up on Trevor Pinnock. Not once, not for a second.
No, and I can tell you that I was with him from the moment I first got to him to the moment we put him on the bird. Right. So, and I was not the only one. There were, at times 6 of us all doing our best to stabilize him and get him as comfortable and as ready for adequate care as we could get. Because we were in a rural, isolated environment. The medical care was the, what a field medic could provide and what we could with our training. And that training was substantial, but it is not a surgeon. It is not a doctor. So we tried as best we could to get them in a situation where they could get the help from those individuals as best they can.
And the difficulty of Pinnock was that it was so high up, we couldn't really get a tourniquet on it. So
yeah, his wounds were substantial. It's the reality of the situation. And I think the reason that hurt a lot of people, that had such a huge impact on my squad, seeing a lot of that, was because we had gotten quite close to Pinnock. Pinnock was an incredibly happy, energetic individual, and he made very quick friends with our squad, even the day we were with him, because he was always in good spirits. You could tell he just kind of had a joy for life. We learned about his family. And, he was always telling, fun stories. He showed us some pictures, which was really cool. So we had gotten really close to those guys, as much as you can in a day, right? And to be laughing and joking with guys, and then the next moment seeing them in a spot where they're struggling, is very difficult. And it hit my squad very hard, because, like I said, we had gotten quite close to those individuals. We had realized how much we relied on them because of their expertise. It made us all feel so much better that these guys who knew what they were doing, like, were really good at their job. These are the guys that are getting us, where we needed to go. And, as that mission wore on, after we had put them on the birds, and it kind of started to sink in, like, wow, the two guys that knew what they were doing, that were experts at their craft, right? They're gone. And we're now the ones that have to do the clearing. We don't know what we're doing, right? If it can happen to those guys, what's going to happen with us? Like, we're not prepared. And so, I mean, that dawned on me, right? One of the hardest things I did through the deployment was, like, look in my guys in the eye and go, okay, time to go, right? Like, you take the mine hound and let's go, right? That takes a toll. And I don't mean to discount the toll that it takes on anybody else, because I realize mine is nothing compared to some of that from the guys that had to, sack it up and do it, right? But, for me, that was a very hard thing, is to look somebody who I had gotten so close with, right? Like, everybody in my squad is family, right? Everybody in our platoon is family, right? And to now look them in the eye and say, all right, take this mine sweeper that doesn't really work and be the guy in front, right? It's very hard. Now, did I feel that they were capable of doing? Yeah, I did. I really did. Because I like to give a lot of freedom, to the soldiers, and I trusted them as adults and professionals to use their judgment. And if I'm being dumb and I'm making a wrong decision, tell me. I'm pretty good about listening. And if you make a good point, I'm going to listen. Especially what we had encountered on that mission, where we saw the reality of IEDs, right? And how, no matter how much of an expert you are, at sometimes your number comes up.
Well, that was a common theme at that time in Afghanistan. The people getting like combat engineers, EOD technicians, military working dog handlers, all these assets that we put in place to fight the IEDs were the ones that were getting shot, blown up the most.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So when you take PFC Smothers or PFC Grace and you hand them a mine hound, they have no training on it, and it's like, good luck.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that I felt was quite negligent, actually, is that we gave a half an hour training on how to use a mine clearing device and said, have at it,
while we were in country.
While you were in country.
Yeah.
No training ahead of time. The training in Kandahar was half an hour to an hour of kind of, I don't want to say pencil whip training, but it's wholly inadequate for the reality of the situation. And, we had like a mock IED setup at Spurwingar, right? Where, go practice. Right? Okay.
And that practice was only good when the EOD guys were down there with us.
Yeah.
Changing where they put the IEDs, or actually giving us hands-on instruction, which
absolutely
we didn't have until really Russ Ho and his team showed up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's a very difficult thing. And, we could go off on a big tangent about, prioritization and things like that. But I do think one of the biggest deficiencies in training is that there was next to no counter IED training.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that.
None.
Yeah, there was none. And there were a lot of attachments that we had, the combat engineers, the EOD, the dog handlers, a lot of those guys that did have much better training, we also saw that they were not insulated from taking
No.
casualties. They bore the brunt of them.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing. And I also think that there's not a right answer. Those IEDs are built so that they're next to indetectable.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're built so that you don't know where they're at.
When I was talking to Russ Ho a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how much he loved that cat and mouse, where we would come out with a mine detector, and the
Sure.
Taliban would change their design so that we couldn't find it. So we'd have to design something new, or they'd try all
Yeah.
these different TTPs, or they put them in different places. And for him, it was fascinating because that's his career field. He loves that
Yeah.
thing. But for us, it was like, what do you mean we can't use the Chia anymore? Or what do you mean we have to use the Mine Hound? Or what do you mean like we can't walk on
Yeah.
the roads? Like, it's a constant evolution. And every time we thought we had it figured out, we had to change.
Yeah. And that's the reality of the situation, right? Like, if it was easy, the war would have been over years ago. Right.
It's true.
This is a population that's very good about being resilient and, changing with the times. And, unfortunately, it's just very difficult when, the mission is what it is and we need to accomplish that mission. It's very hard to keep everyone safe when, the enemy knows what you're going to do.
Right.
And is able to plan around it.
Well, and the IED that got that the engineers hit was a clear example of them knowing that we like to exploit, and we like to know, and we like to we don't just bypass. Like, they baited them in.
Absolutely. The mission was to find and destroy the
clear
IEDs, right?
Yeah.
It was not to, wow, this looks really bad, we should move on.
Right.
Right. Which is what any normal mission, when we were just going somewhere, we
regular
would
patrol,
mark
we
it.
just bypassed it. Yeah.
Yeah. We would mark it. We would call it up and be like, hey, there's an IED here, and then get away from it. Right. And that's a self-preservation tactic. Right. But that mission in particular was to find them and blow them up.
Yeah, we blew a lot. I mean, you guys blew a lot. We blew a lot.
Absolutely.
And it was just crazy. I think of all the missions that we did, that couple of days might have been the most controlled deaths that we did.
It was
in
constant.
such a short amount of time.
Absolutely.
It was just
Yeah.
all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Day 2 with Throat Chop was close. It was similar.
Yeah.
And then, that's just 2 squads. We had 3rd platoon to our west, and they were clearing south too.
Yep.
And there were elements of 1, 2, 3, and they were clearing south too. I mean, it was a huge operation. And so, just to close out, Pinnock passed pretty quick. I think we got word very early on that he passed.
Yeah, I think back
That day,
when he made it back to Kandahar airfields, he passed when he got to Kandahar.
Yeah.
Airfield.
But we were hopeful for Lily.
Yeah, we were all incredibly hopeful. And I remember consoling guys saying, look, Lily's going to be fine. He was conscious. He was talking to us. And we're like, man, he's going to be in good shape. He's going to make it. That's something to take. We were looking for anything to give us some kind of positive motivation to keep that mission going. Because we were on a razor's edge there of just falling apart, right? Like we all knew it, right? Because the lieutenant was shooken up really bad. He got a concussion. Sergeant Ott, the platoon sergeant, had a concussion. A lot of dudes were shooken up badly from concussion, disorientation, and seeing their friends get hit, which is psychologically devastating. So we were very fragile. So we were trying to find any motivation, and thankfully it was true. We all thought that Lily was going to be just fine. He was conscious. He was able to get on the bird, gave us a thumbs up. We felt good. And then we found out, I believe 2 days later, that he had passed and that he had significant internal bleeding that we just were not aware of and we couldn't have known. And that made it very challenging for for the medical care going back because they weren't able to stop the bleeding, from my understand. So yeah, it was a very difficult mission, and I, personally and my squad are so indebted to those two individuals, um, for what they did and what they sacrificed, and for that reason, and I've talked with you guys about this before, that like I have such a huge respect for combat engineers. They will never have to buy a beer around me ever again, um, because I've never seen, that kind of bravery, where those guys knew what they were doing and they just walked right into it, and with no questions asked. One guy had been shot in the neck 2 weeks before, and he came out to do it. Like
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's amazing to me. Like it's just
yeah,
baffling to me. I saw a lot of heroic things, through a couple years in Afghanistan, and that's kind of at the top of the list because those guys are just, they're phenomenal.
And I remember we used them on the not the same guys. I'm sure they were in the formation somewhere in the battalion, but we had combat engineers clearing in front of us during when we cleared the Horn too. They were the clearing element during that mission as well. But after those two battalion missions, we didn't really get any support from combat engineers again. And I think that
No,
their command probably said, "Hey, we are not going to keep sending our dudes into a meat grinder."
no, and I don't blame them in
Yep.
the slightest, because that job, it is an incredible one, and it's one that they should not have been put in that situation, right? Because, um, and that's, to be fair, leadership and whatnot tried many different things to try to minimize the IED threat, and it's just impossible, right? You can minimize it to a certain extent, but the reality is these are incredibly hard to find. They're incredibly destructive,
and they're
and if
everywhere.
and they're everywhere,
Yeah,
right? And if we change our tactics to address them, they would literally change the next week on how they emplace them.
Yep.
It was,
yeah,
um, just a very difficult situation. And the combat engineers were also given an impossible task, right? Like find these IEDs with equipment that's inadequate. Um, but that's the mission, right? At some point, you have to say, look, if guys are literally just being thrown into the meat grinder, why is it always my guys?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
And I get it. And I remember going to the memorial service that their unit put on, the field artillery, and it was incredibly moving. And I remember shaking a lot of hands and crying with a lot of dudes that day because, it was
They're small
was
units too. They don't have a lot of guys.
absolutely,
Yeah, it was just a
absolutely.
it looked like a platoon out there, and that was their entire company, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. And it's one of those things you kind of lose, right? Like you kind of get in your bubble of Bravo 164, we're the ones out here fighting the fight or whatever. But you don't realize that there's units like that, right? That are having to be broken up and sent to go work with guys they've never worked for, and just trust that they're in good hands, right? Like that's a hard thing to do. And I, I think you kind of lose sight of that a little bit. Um, and I mean, I know I did, right? Like I get into the bubble, and parts of you can go like, woe is me. Like, why am I always going out on these missions? And you don't realize that everybody else is doing the same thing, if not more.
I mean that
Yeah.
mission had a forcing function on our tactics. It had
Oh,
kind of
absolutely.
already started with Luxmore and then Jay,
Sure.
but this was kind of like the final straw. I was like, nope, we are off the roads. We
Yeah,
are
and
we are done with the roads. We are no longer going to try to exploit IEDs. Our new TTP is identify, report, and bypass.
Yeah, and the next day, we were off the roads. Like
Yeah.
it went quick.
absolutely.
It completely changed how we patrolled, and it completely changed our movements. Actually,
It made the movements more difficult, but safer.
yeah, it did.
Because if we had kept at that pace that we were at in the middle of June, walking on the roads, doing missions like that, we would have been replaced by July because we would have run out of people.
Yeah, there would be no
Yeah.
one left. Yeah. It was incredibly sobering. And like I said, it was difficult, and that is actually a turning point for my squad as well, because up to that point, we had avoided casualties of any sort, right? We had been very fortunate. And that day changed that, right? Because they were part of our squad. And one of the things I make sure all the time is to make sure those guys, whenever we start talking about, the casualties that Bravo 164 encountered during that deployment, that we include Joseph Lilly and Trevor Pinnock, because they were part of our squad, our platoon, our
100%.
company.
Yeah.
And, it means a lot to me to make sure we include them. And I'll never forget their sacrifice, right? Because it's one that's been incredibly important to me, and I would not be here today if it wasn't for them. And I realize that. So.
And it's something we've talked about before, just how lucky we were as a unit to not sustain more casualties, because the opportunities were there. The number of times we got shot at, the IEDs that we almost stepped on, or the ones that may have been turned off that we didn't walk over. ANA soldiers that would get shot right next to American soldiers. So, I mean, there's a discussion about luck and not necessarily spirituality, but kind of like superstition and the role that kind of played in our day to day. And I'm not a superstitious person, but by the end, I was like, man, you do not say the words "quick patrol," or you don't walk out that wire without knocking on wood, or anything like that.
Or the cursed pair of boots.
The boots. Oh man, we'll have to wait for Luke to come back to talk about the boots, because that is just that is
cursed
boots. Legend. Of course, he runs off right when we get to that topic, but even before that, there was the engineers. If they hadn't been walking up there, we would have taken 2 casualties in our element. Boyce, when Boyce got shot.
Right.
Who else can say that they got shot in the pelvis and a bullet fragment pinned their femoral artery to their pelvis? And they I mean, you were there. I mean, he didn't even bleed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were absolutely shocked, because we had taken that contact and he got hit, spun around, and you knew he had been shot. We pulled him out of the water, and when we went to do care on him, right, there was hardly any blood, and no one could, this can't be right. Like, he just got shot through the pelvis. He should be bleeding all over the place. Yeah. And he wasn't. And it turns out that by some insane dumb luck, the bullet had ricocheted, gone through his Kevlar diaper, and pinned his artery to his pelvis, but did not rupture the artery. Like, what? Like, that's insane. And, it's one of those things. I'm not mad about it, right? You'll take them any way you can get them, but it's insane. That's a 1 in a million, right? And, that's not the only instance, right? You had, Robbins, one of our fister, stepped on an IED on his birthday, and it low ordered, right? So just the blasting cap went off, but the main charge didn't.
Yeah, literally exploded under his foot, just a pop.
Under his foot, pop. It's like a firecracker going off on his birthday.
Kohler was right on top of him.
Yep,
absolutely, because we were trying to move very quickly into a compound for a variety of reasons. That's another fun topic of discussion. We won't go into that one. But and then you had times when Burl was gunning a truck, and a bullet lodged right in the top of his helmet, right? Did not, hit his head, his actual physical scalp.
Right.
It went into the helmet and
went all the way around the back.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it was insane. Like, the dumb luck sometimes, you'll take it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think we can all say that we were lucky, because we have all had our close calls.
Close calls, yeah.
We talked, I think, a couple episodes ago about the bullet holes in my rucksack, and hitting IEDs. And Luke, you've had your share of close calls too.
That same mission where Burl got shot in the helmet, they raked the fucking rounds right outside of the truck as I was trying to take a piss. So, and just bullets zipping and whizzing and snapping, and those really close ones.
I mean, that's the thing is that all they had to do was get lucky once, and
Yeah.
Luxmore, Swindle, these were you can give a little bit of credit to Taliban gunners, but not that much.
I won't.
They're the likelihood that they hit both of those guys in the places that they hit them with the weapon systems they hit them with, they
Yeah.
weren't good. They were lucky.
Yeah, sometimes the spray and pray, sometimes it works.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we were just luckier. I'd like to think we were a little bit better trained too and better equipped, but yeah,
Just got lucky, man. Because sometimes it was just inches, I mean, when you can feel the subsonic like vibrations off of a bullet, it's close,
The reality of combat, right, is that there's so many opportunities for bad things to happen that sometimes they do. And sometimes they don't, which is, you're thankful for those.
Yeah, and actually one of the benefits and one of the the good things, I guess, about this most recent conflict is that most of the time it's okay.
Yeah.
It's not like storming the beaches of Normandy or something. Like more or less numerically speaking, you're all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
that was always fun.
I think a lot of those close calls kind of generated that superstition that kind of started to really run rampant towards the end of the deployment. And while Luke was stepped away, we mentioned the epic tale of the legendary boots, and we didn't want to have that discussion without him.
Right.
So
The
that
cursed
story,
boots.
this cursed boots.
The
So
cursed boots.
Y'all
yeah.
are more intertwined with that one than I was.
I am
was a
distinctly intertwined
hilarious
with it. Yeah.
bystander on that one.
Yeah.
So Boyce got a brand new pair of boots.
Brand spanking new.
Brand spanking new, and he was so excited
Mhm.
because they were like third party aftermarket, really comfortable boots. He was really stoked, and he was in the process of breaking them in. He didn't want to take them out on patrol yet, so they're still basically brand new. And then he got shot, and then he never saw those boots again. So he said to his buddy, also Eric Clark, "Hey man, go ahead and take those boots. They're brand new. Someone might as well get some use out of them." And so Clark did the same thing. Wore them around the fob, wore them on like mounted days when he was driving or whatever, but hadn't taken them out the wire just yet. Not even a week later, Clark gets his leg blown off. And now we're like, okay, like we're already kind of leery of the boots, but we're just not going to touch them. We're just like, well, I'm sitting in the corner. I was like, anyway, after a couple days, I get, Perez, he needed new boots, and he had been wearing his out, and they were looking rough. And he kept looking at those boots. I'm going to take those boots. I'm like, Perez, don't take those boots. I'm going to take those boots. It's like, Perez, don't take those boots.
They got bad juju.
They got bad juju. And he says,
Infamous.
I don't believe in bad juju.
Yeah.
And he took the boots. And he wore the boots on one mission. The mission in which he was shot in the arm and almost had his arm blown off above the elbow. Yet somehow, when he got medevaced, those boots didn't leave with him. We walked into our room because he got shot. He got Kazvac back. We finished our mission. Luke and I come back to the room, and there's the fucking boots sitting in the middle of the floor.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if they were bloody or what, but they were there. And I was like, fuck no way. We were getting rid of these things. But I wasn't going to touch them. Yeah, I wasn't going to touch them. Like, no one was going to touch those things. The only person that would have was Perez, and he's on his way to freaking Germany. So if I remember correctly, I think I took one, and Luke, I think you took the other.
Nah, dude, I didn't get anywhere near him. You took them both.
I took them both.
You got a broom handle.
I got two broom handles.
Yeah, that's what it was. You wouldn't even touch them with your own hands. Like, you got a handle, and you like laced them through the broom handle and took them out to the burn pit.
To the burn barrel.
Or the barrel, yeah.
I drop them in the burn barrel, and those, believe it or not, I swear it to this day, there was a poof as soon as they caught fire, when all that bad juju was released from those boots.
I think that's one of the things that's kind of funny is that you have these weird superstitions, and everybody would have their varying degrees of superstitions, and there's things that we would do to kind of mitigate them. I feel like Pfeiffer had a piece of wood
Yeah.
that he had like carved out of something, and he tucked it into the molly webbing on his gear, and he carried it almost the whole deployment, I think.
Yeah, and
But
I'm
at
not a
least when
superstitious
it came
person
down
either.
to us.
But I started rubbing that piece of wood for like the last
Yeah.
month of the deployment
Yeah.
because I was like, whatever. I'm not superstitious, but
Yeah.
Right.
I'm a little stitious, right? To quote Michael Scott.
Well, I've got a very interesting physique in that. Now it's just been pervaded by a beer belly, but it used to be back in the day. It was just my genetics kicking in. I have a very kind of pronounced belly, so I used to roll around with my shirt. And I'd pull my shirt up, walk up to guys, and be like, "Grab my belly for good luck before a big mission," because it was rubbing the Buddha's belly,
Little Buddha belly.
Yeah.
Well, I remember Kohler tried to push back on that, tried to like take that stigma away from us by like deliberately breaking all the
Yeah.
rules. We'd be like, there were a few things.
Nah.
You never say it's an easy mission. You never
Yep.
say we'll be home before 10. Like, there's just certain things you don't say. And he would start like a mission brief. All right, guys, we got an easy mission tomorrow. We got to here before 10. And everyone just like
Just flipping their shit.
flips their shits,
Yeah.
runs, finds some wood to knock on.
Yep.
Like, and he thought it was hilarious. And we're like, dude, it is not funny anymore.
His subversive Mormonism was kicking
Yeah.
in.
No, and that's very funny because like I said, I am not a superstitious person, but towards the end, man, I was just like, look, I don't know, I don't think it helps, but
Doesn't hurt.
But it doesn't hurt. It sure doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And every time I rub that piece of wood, I haven't been shot, so might as well keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
God.
Oh man.
Well, and I think that it really was just kind of our way of controlling something that we knew in the back of our minds wasn't really controllable. We couldn't control where the Taliban was going to place an ID or how well they were going to aim that day. Most of those missions should have been easy missions, and we should have been home by 10.
Yeah, there were a couple missions that, I for one would throw like a bottle of water in my pocket because I'd be like, man, we're gonna be in and out of this one real quick. Sometimes that's a drive to Zengabad that turns into an 8-hour mission,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? And you're like, God dang it, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm guilty of being like, well, I'm not gonna bring all of the stuff I normally would because this is gonna be a short little quick jaunt, or I'm just walking to Dorsai today. Right. We had a mission that was like, hey, let's go walk to Dorsai real quick and then come back. And it turns into oh, wow, we just engaged this dude 2 miles up. Go do him. Right.
Run down
Jesus.
hyena.
Run down hyena.
Our
yeah.
version of the Mogadishu Mile.
That was, man, that was a whole mess of a mission. And I remember being yelled at by people back in the talk on that one and yelling right back. And I apologize, Lieutenant Van Kira, for that. Because you did not believe me that dude got disintegrated, but he got straight up disintegrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was in a few pieces.
That's all we need to say about that.
Yep.
But
That
I
video
could
has
not
been
find
shared.
his cell phone because there was nothing left.
There's nothing
Yeah.
left. Yeah.
There was more remaining of his motorcycle than there was of him, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah. And that's a testament to the Hellfire missile.
Yes.
It's beautiful weapon system.
This segment brought to you by National University, veteran owned, and operating and serving the veteran community since 1971.
Dang, someone's reading the website over there.
I did. I took a look at their fine sponsor, and everything I just said is in fact true.
Yeah, and they are founded by a former retired Navy captain. So it's a veteran-founded university, and they're very veteran-friendly. So be sure to check out our social media page to find all their post 9/11 and Montgomery GI Bill funding options. In addition to trying to take that kind of control back with the superstition and the little habits that we did, we had to find other ways to take our minds off of what was going down. And one of the biggest things that comes to mind to me for two things. One is like platoon sports, which got shut down pretty early, and then the NCO poker game, which Luke and I were not of rank to participate in, but
there were plenty of opportunities for an enlisted poker game to be going on as well. For the junior enlisted, you just didn't take the initiative to do it.
my bad.
No, not true. To be honest with you, it was yes, and you are correct. You had to find ways,
Yeah.
right, to unwind and unplug, right? Because the reality of what we were doing was it was very heavy, and if you went back to your bunk and you let your mind dwell on it, you would go to a dark place and you would never get out.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, sometimes we would play platoon games. The Canadians, in their infinite wisdom, got a bunch of hockey equipment, brought it to the cop, and it was primo hockey equipment. And you could have full on hockey games on the pad by the chow hall, and it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the appeal for a lot, even if you knew nothing about hockey, is that Private Joe Snuffy could just wreck his squad leader into those shipping containers. Hey, I was just playing the puck, dog. Right? And you were, right? Like, I remember I caught a few sticks to the shins, right? Like, that I'm pretty sure were not going for the puck, right? And it was great fun, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone kind of got into it. Even if you didn't know any hockey, you could run around, whack stuff. You didn't need to be good at hockey. You could just kind of have fun.
Yeah.
And, for that hour or two that you're running around, smashing into stuff and, getting whacked by Sergeant Ott playing goalie, because he was mean. He was mean as a goalie.
Dude.
And, but you weren't thinking about the mission. You weren't thinking that you're going to Sketcha and Jot or, Salamcon the next day, right? So it was a way for your mind to kind of reset itself. And we had platoon games where we'd play football out on the HLZ, or you'd play ultimate frisbee, or you'd hit golf balls that you covered in Kimlite juice and hit them at night, which was super cool, right? Like, it was fun little things like that. And, some guys would play video games. Like, I remember, there were dudes that would get into World of Warcraft and just like descend into that world, and it worked for them, right? You had board games. There was a really lively Axis and Allies game that played constantly. It was super cool, super fun. And it played almost every night, right? And then, you had an NCO poker game that, personally I needed, right? It was a lot of NCOs from all the different platoons that could get together, talk about the missions that they just went on, where they're going the next day. You can laugh, bust people's balls. But it also had a really good purpose besides just letting us blow off steam, and that you developed a real rapport with some of the other, platoons and elements like the snipers and things like that you wouldn't normally interact with as much on a daily basis, but you developed really tight bonds. And I remember there were times that, we were struggling for whatever reason. Maybe we had a couple missions back to back to back that were, really difficult, that some of the NCOs from like second platoon would say, hey, you guys are super slammed. We'll take that mission to Zangabad. We'll go talk to the lieutenant, see if we can't pick that up for you, so you don't have to do that, right? So it actually provided a pretty good function about letting us kind of gauge where people are at and help them out if you can.
Sure.
But it became a lot of fun, but it also, there was a lot of hilarity that ensued around that poker game sometimes, because if, you knew that the guy across the table from you was going to Sketcha the next day, right, on a really bad mission, and he's playing crazy with his chips and he's going all in, you're like, wait, does he actually have it? Or does he think he's not going to be here tomorrow? Right? Because he's, going to get shot. Right? So he doesn't care and he's playing crazy. So it became an interesting dynamic of the game, because you didn't really know how people were playing, but you also, there were weird rituals around that game. And, it was just a really great way to unplug and unwind. And I remember it was like every day I'm like, I'm not playing cards tonight. I'm just going to sit and read a book or whatever. And then, of course, 8 o'clock would come around after all the mission briefs and things like that. Hey, you playing cards? Yeah, all right, I'm coming. I'll be there. I think we had a popcorn machine in there at one point, and
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
it was just a really good way to kind of blow off some steam, laugh with people, um, and kind of disconnect for a little bit. I know for me it was incredibly valuable, and some of the friends I made at that poker table are lifelong friends and some of the best friends I have. So to this day.
It's
But
interesting the things that you end up kind of clinging to. Like for me, it was always life after,
yeah,
life after the army. Because I was
absolutely.
in those single digits, I was 6 months out from getting out, or I was, 5, 4, 3. And I was always focusing on that next step. And I had a trip planned. When I first got out of the army, I was only out for a couple months, and then I went on a tour of Europe, and I had planned this trip for 2 years, But when I was in Afghanistan, like, between getting ready to go to school and, shooting off and doing all applications, University of Kentucky and everything, but also getting to plan that trip, man. Like, I obsessed over it. Like, I bought the gear, I looked at my train routes, I bought my plane tickets, I was like, I didn't fucking care what it took for me to get to that point. And
Yeah.
that was what kept me kind of locked in and focused, was that trip to Europe.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You had to find something, right, that you could latch onto that gave you a reason to get up the next day, do it again, and move on. And some guys had issues um, because it was difficult for them to do that, right? And I don't blame them in the slightest, right? Like we were in a very bad situation doing a very tough job. And some guys, right? Like it's hard to disconnect what you're doing on a given day, right? So some guys couldn't just, hey, I'm going to go play World of Warcraft and not think about the fact that I just got shot at for 3 hours, all day, came back, took a shower, and, let that go. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do, to just let that go. And, some guys had a better time of that, some didn't. Um, and, I remember talking with some of the soldiers that were having problems with it. And a lot of that was finding a way for them to get their mind off things, right? To not focus on the reality of the situation that we are in, um, because it can be consuming.
When I look back on it, man, I think that if I had not been so close to getting out, I'm not sure it would have treated me as well. Like I think it would have been harder. Like the irony is that for me being so close to being out of the army, is that it was more kind of tangible and doable for me to finish that deployment on the strong leg. If I had known that I had to come back and I would have had, let's say, 2 years left in the army, I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't, woulda, coulda, shoulda, don't get you nowhere, but I'm not sure that my ability to tangle with everything would have been as fortuitous.
Well, and that's, uh, you know, as a leader, you kind of had to watch your soldiers, and as a squad leader in particular, it's not like as a lieutenant or commander who's kind of detached. You're with them every day. You're living with them. You see them in the hall every 5 minutes. Watching that strain kind of develop on the guys that aren't able to compartmentalize or aren't able to find that mental release. And we had a pretty high attrition rate of guys that kind of reached their breaking point. And this is something we've discussed, and I would like to explore it, again today. Was that how there's nothing wrong with finding your breaking point.
No, no, not at all. And that's the reality of the tasks we were given, right? Was that we had an op tempo that did not let us complete a mission and pull back, complete a mission, pull back. It was constant, right? And, we all have a breaking point, like we all do. And for a variety of reasons, it's a different place for different people. Um, and, for me, I, and I'm not proud of it to a certain extent, right? But I have a very strong fuck it streak, and that I would just resign myself, whatever, like whatever you want to blow me up today, cool, whatever, I'll walk, right? That's most people care about their livelihood, right? Like about their health. Um, and right when you're being constantly thrown to the wolves, and I think one of the issues we had was we didn't really know why, right? It was just being thrown in the grinder because, right, to prevent a spectacular attack on Kandahar. Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Um, and we did have a lot of guys that started to reach their point. And I, for my part, started to realize that we're not doing anything here, right? That was my own personal opinion, that we were not making a difference in the Spurwingar region, right? And if a guy came to me and said, look, I can't walk out that gate anymore without being just immobilized with anxiety. I got it. Like, I realized and I saw it. And I was more than happy to be like, you know what? We have other jobs that we can utilize you in. And there's no shame in that. They shouldn't feel guilty about that. And honestly, it's more of my failing, and that I didn't find ways to make sure that it didn't get to somebody till they didn't get to that point, right? And I know we tried to utilize some things where we rotated like guys that would clear. Like we tried to identify the most stressful position, in a movement would be the guy at the front with the mind clear, and we tried to rotate that, right? But the realities of what we were doing with 15, 20 dudes on any particular mission is that we were asking a lot of people, and a lot of them did get to a point where they just couldn't keep going out the gate and being effective. And that's okay, right? Like we all they're not the first ones, they're not going to be the last, right? It's the reality of the situation, and it's been happening since the beginning of time, right? And most of it is a mental thing, right? Like your brain it's a self-preservation instinct, right? Where you're just like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. And it's tough to see, and it kills me when I see guys that are still upset about it, or they feel guilt, they feel shame, because they should not in the slightest. And I take a lot of blame for that, because I personally should have found ways to mitigate it within my own squad, right? I should have been more cognizant of it and try to nip it in the bud before it becomes an actual problem. But towards the end, I got to the point where I was like, yeah, if you can't do it, that's cool, because that's one less person I know is coming home. And my mission for the last couple months of that deployment was to make sure that all our guys came home, right? Because none of it made sense anymore for me. And that's my own problem. And that's probably why I wasn't the favorite of the command.
But you were the favorite of your soldiers.
I mean, for better or worse, right?
But you were, man.
And I appreciate you saying that. But it was, I very much, the health and safety of my soldiers was all that mattered to me at the end. Like that, we weren't going to Sketcha or Najat or Salam Khan again to get shot up wasn't going to change the course of the history of Spurwingar. Whether or not, Private Snuffy came back is going to matter, right?
Yeah.
That is going to matter to me, to them, to their family. And that's what was important to me, right? So that's why I'm not a good soldier, I guess.
Well, I think that was one of the things about the particular time that we were there too, because this is in 2012, so that war had been raging for 11 years at that point, and I feel like there was a disenfranchisement with the idea that anything was going to change, and I feel like those, like, nobody really, I think it's actually almost become a cliche. And that guys say, I didn't do it for the cause, or I didn't do it because I believed the mission, but I did it for the guy standing next to me. But that's really kind of the reinforcing aspect of those last few years of active combat in Afghanistan, especially, but Iraq as well. It's like we didn't go there thinking that we were going to liberate the people, or we didn't go there thinking we were going to exact vengeance upon the Taliban and Al Qaeda for 9/11. We went there because it was our fucking job, and it was just part of the reality of what we had signed up to do. And so because of that, I think that's one of the reasons that the mental attrition was so infecting throughout our ranks, is because guys knew deep down inside that it didn't fucking matter.
Yeah, and I was not privy to some of the decisions about the big picture items, right? And I don't pretend to understand them as well as those that were there in the room, right? But on our level, and I don't mean to speak for everyone else, but my cynical self, I could not see a reason we were doing what we were doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I understand the need for an op tempo, but when the reality is that we're fighting effectively a bunch of teenagers that had been given $20 to shoot at the Americans when they come down the road, right? Like, that's not counterinsurgency. If I kill this kid, I'm creating 3 other like people that are going to fight us. His whole family probably already wants to kill us. Well, now they're really going to want to kill us all, right? Like, we're not helping the situation by killing everyone, right? But the best I could see that was what our job was to do, was to be engaged by the enemy and then kill them, right?
Yeah.
And that's what made it hard about where we were. The people didn't want our help.
Right.
2 years earlier, you're in Paktia and you're helping build roads and build wells and do things and win over the population, and they wanted your help. But we never had the opportunity to do that. We couldn't take a breath long enough to help somebody. We get some kids some backpacks. That was probably the most meaningful thing that we ever did on that whole deployment for the civilian population.
Yeah, and that's actually what I kind of wanted to circle back to, is that I remember my first deployment really thinking that we were making a difference, right? Like, we were engaging with the population. We were having meaningful conversations with the elders. We legitimately would try to act on what they were saying and telling us to try and win the population over. And there were a couple towns where you saw the difference. You noticed the difference. And I remember used to thinking, if this is happening around Afghanistan, right, I can see forward progress being made. And I think, after spending a little bit of time in Panjwai, where that was not, like, we didn't even pretend that that's what we were trying to do, right? Like, there was no winning of hearts and minds. Like, we would go have a meeting with the elders, which was in effect just find somebody to talk to, because we know we're going to get lit up when we walk out of this village, right? So let's get in and get out before they can get a handful of dudes instead of just 1 or 2, right? And the cynic in me was just like, what even are we doing, right? Like, we're here just so somebody can say that we're here, right? And again, I like to hope that there is some grand plan that we were a piece of. But I think events and history is showing that that's not the case.
Yeah, and for our listeners that don't necessarily follow our Spur One Guard Veterans page or some of the other, we received word about a month ago that the Taliban had retaken Spur One Guard, and that most of the villages that we patrolled in 2012 are now fully under Taliban command, and the Afghan government isn't even fighting to take them back.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. Glad that there's no more conflict in Panjwai.
There's no more conflict.
It's peaceful.
That's true.
Yeah,
no, but I mean, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think we all realized that once we left, that it's going to go back to being Mullah Omar's hometown, right? Like I think we all kind of got that. I don't think anyone felt, with the exception of one or two villages, we never felt particularly welcomed. There was one north of OP Mosque that was it was like the Afghan Disneyland, and they fed us like kings.
Yeah. I remember that.
And Sergeant Baker, if you're listening to this, you're probably still bitter about not being invited for dinner. And I'm sorry. He was very upset that he did not get to eat on that mission.
No,
We
he'll be
did not
okay.
purposely hide that from you.
He'll get over
Blame Lieutenant Persons.
it.
That's Major Persons now? Okay.
Oh, Major Persons?
Major Persons, yeah.
Oh, he'll always be Lieutenant Persons to
Oh,
me,
yeah,
though.
100%. Yep. So I'm glad we got to redo this.
I think it's more lighthearted.
It's a little more lighthearted. We hit the main points that we hit last time that I thought were really, really important, and we hit on some new ones that I think kind of, I don't know, I think we added more to the conversation today.
Less discussion
Yeah.
about Boyce's testicles this time, though.
Which were huge.
Oh, yeah, we hate to miss out on that because it was a big part of the conversation.
No, it's one of those things that I'd be remiss to that. I'm incredibly thankful for everybody we worked with, and all the soldiers that we we had there at Spurwingar and Zangabad and Mazamgar, all that. It was an incredibly difficult situation, and I think it's a part of all of our lives, whether we like it or not, right? And I know it's helped shape me, as I think it has everyone else. But we have to take from it what we can and make the best of a bad situation. And I know one thing that's important, and I know you guys have been really good about doing this, is trying to keep a lot of these connections together with guys you served with, directly or indirectly, because the reality of the situation, and not to get dark, right, is that a lot of veterans and ones that we served with are struggling, right? They're having a hard time coming to grips with life after Afghanistan, right? And I've had some people that are very close to me that succumb to that struggle, and it's very important to me, especially recently, to make sure that doesn't happen again, right? To make sure that we keep an open dialogue, to make sure that people always have a place to talk, have outlets, and realize that you're not alone, right? Like, we all serve together. I'm incredibly thankful for the sacrifices everyone had made, for me, right, for each other. And unfortunately, the service doesn't end when we come back sometimes. And the reality of what we went through is that it impacts a lot of guys for a long time. And we really need to make sure we're keeping dialogues open and laughing and joking and letting people know that there's some good sides in life that you really need to reconnect with. So and thank you guys for doing the thing. I think this podcast is really important to reconnect guys and make sure that people know that their experiences are shared, and some of the things you went through, other people went through as well, and can act as an outlet to help. So yeah.
Well, we appreciate your willingness to participate and the trust that you
Yeah.
put in us to put together a decent product,
Yeah.
and for your patience, of course.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I'm excited to be a part of it. And if you guys ever need somebody to come back in and heckle any of you future guests, I would be glad.
Oh
To,
man,
Ooh, we
to
have the
come-
capability to do that
tempt
too.
me, Frodo.
I will be happy to make short guest spots to talk crap to most of your guests. 'Cause most of them, I can probably make fun of, and they can make fun of me. So
Right.
Yeah,
and I have a thick enough skin. I think it'll be okay.
but they may not.
If not, I'll
Right.
sue your ass.
We forgot to mention that. That was a big part of the first go round, was how Stuart, now that you are out of the Army, you are a licensed attorney. You went to
I
law
am.
school and passed the bar, and you know
Yeah.
it's
So
a
I am.
pretty lofty achievement by an 11
I
Bravo.
not really. Law school's easy. It yeah. So I am theoretically able to sue your ass in Florida. So if any of you step foot in this state, I will sue you. But no, I am an attorney. I do not currently practice law. I actually work for the State Department. I'm a foreign service officer with the State Department. So if any of you want to go to that means nothing. That literally means that I am going to the poorest country in Africa next year. And if anybody would like to go to a vacation to Mauritania, you have a place to stay. So
Do we actually though?
yeah, you do.
Can we get a visa to Mauritania?
Dude, they will pay you to come to Mauritania. Like, you think I'm joking too? No, yeah, no. Mauritania is just south of Morocco on the Western Africa, and it is all Sahara Desert. And yeah, it's very interesting. So my job is not glamorous, that's for sure. But if anybody wants a free vacation, hit me up. But they don't have alcohol there.
So I know when we'll do this and then we'll wrap it up and call it a wrap. But you last up when we tried to record this the first time, you really wanted to say something about your first sergeant. And this was kind of backtracking a little bit, but I think it's really important to you and to the listeners to kind of hear a little bit about him, how exceptional of a leader he was, what happened to him, and what we kind of learned from him.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I had tried to kind of work that in last time, and it's something that means a lot to me. My first sergeant that I had at my unit in Alaska was First Sergeant Brent Myers. And he was my introduction to kind of what an NCO should be, right? He had done his entire career in Ranger Battalion, was a Ranger instructor, and was incredibly accomplished, capable, and just an incredible human being, right? Just crazy. And there's stories abound about him. I remember seeing him run a half marathon barefoot because he thought his shoes hurt his feet, right? Like, he was just one of these kind of odd dudes, right? But would also do anything. And he also would do anything for his soldiers. And he cared more for them than any NCO I've ever met. And, really showed me what an NCO could and should be, right? Like, your soldiers are more important than you. And you need to realize that. When we were deployed, he would join missions as Private Schneebly. And he would tell every 21-year-old E4 promotable team leader to tell him what to do. Because he didn't want to, put a wrench in the gears of the platoon or the mission. He just wanted to be out there with his soldiers. And, I remember one big firefight, a friend of mine, Justin Coates, has written about it actually pretty extensively, that they were in a really big firefight where the first vehicle was hit by an RPG and completely knocked out. And Private Billy Schneebly, a.k.a. Brent Myers, hopped out of the rear truck in a hail of gunfire, ran all the way to the front vehicle, was knocking on the window to ask if everyone was okay, and laughing as he would turn and shoot. And they would be like, "First Sergeant, get in the truck so we can get the hell out of here." "Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure you were okay, battle buddy." And ran back to the truck, firing as he went, right? Like, that's just who he was. He put his life on the line to check on his soldiers. And after he retired, a couple years later, the demons caught up with him, right? And he ended up, taking his own life. And, that one has impacted me so much because here was this, in my mind, like the perfect soldier, right? It was what I aspired to be, like the NCO I wanted to be. And I thought he was invincible. I thought he was bulletproof, right? But it didn't take long for the demons to catch up. And it hit me hard, like really hard. And, I have a lot of friends who served with him and they've gotten him hard because we always believed that this was a person that was larger than life, right? That was immune to this kind of thing. And, if the demons can catch up to someone like that, right? Like, how are we going to make it? So that's why it's become a lot more important for me to check on a lot of people and make sure that they don't get to that point, right? Because we all lose fantastic people that have a lot to offer, and that we can all benefit from by having them in our lives. And it means a lot to me to make sure that those kind of people are checked in on, right? I absolutely am one of the ones that I thought that's a guy that doesn't need to be checked on because he's the best. He's the best of us. And that's not true. So that's one that means a lot to me, and I appreciate you let me take a second to kind of tell his story a little bit, because it's there's so many people like that I wish we could take a second to mention them all, but we can't, right? And but we all have those people, and we should all remember why we check in on each other, and that we kind of owe it to each other a little bit. So,
Well,
Yeah, for sure.
we
let's
really
get back to
appreciate
telling dick jokes.
Well, Luke, do you got anything else over on your end?
I just want to say thanks again to Stuart for helping us out, being a good man, and
It's
getting behind
absolutely
the
my
mic
pleasure.
again. Get behind the mic. There we go.
Yeah, we'll probably bring you back on again, but yeah, we really
Yeah.
do appreciate your patience. Again, I've said that like
Oh,
6
yeah.
times, but it's super helpful.
It's
And,
absolutely my pleasure.
And is there anything else that you wanted to say?
No, man, I just hope I can come back again and talk shit.
We'll facilitate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will be done. For sure.